Hey guys, this is Solution PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading Green Turn Through by Another Fucking Robin. This is Chapter 21. Tim is just about to get to school with Steph from the coffee shop where Alfred dropped them off, bickering amicably about whether or not the Powerpuff Girls could beat Superman in a fight when they hear a startled gasp from an alley nearby. They lock eyes and approach the mouth of the alley silently, slipping back into their vigilante personas, and peer around the corner. Tim is expecting to see a mugging or perhaps an assault. What he is not expecting to see is Peter Parker leaning against the grimy alley wall like a constipated mannequin with the most strange smile plastered on his face that mankind has ever had the misfortune to witness. Steph steps in front of the alley mouth and splays her hands in a sort of "what the fuck" motion. Tim watches from his spot at the mouth of the alley, scanning the walls and floors for clues, trying to figure out what the fuck they've stumbled into. Steph takes a more direct approach in her quest for information. What the actual fuck were you doing leaning against a wall in the alley, duck? That's fucking dangerous. You could have been stabbed. Wait, were you stabbed? Steph pokes around his midsection a couple of times, trying to locate a non-existent stab wound. I assure you, I'm stab-free. Peter tries to reassure, sounding like he's caught halfway between exasperation and horror. The horror at what, Tim can't say. Asking if you've been stabbed is a normal question. This is Gotham after all. But why were you in the alley? She questions again. Peter looks between them helplessly and, after realizing that he'll be getting no backup from Tim, concedes, I was just chilling. Relaxing. Yes, very much so. They don't even need to call him out on the awful lie because his face falls slack in disappointment and he whispers a quiet, "Dude," under his breath. Tim decides to investigate that at a later date and takes pity on the poor kid, deciding to give him an out of the conversation. Duck? Steph sends him a glare over Peter's head that says, "We're investigating this later." But Peter takes the opportunity to shift the topic of conversation readily. Yeah, according to some people, I look like a lost duckling, which is just plain wrong. He stops from their walking and takes a moment to look Peter up and down. Nah, I see it. Peter makes an indignant squawk. What? On Peter's other side, Steph slips back into her carefree attitude and huffs a laugh. Peter, you literally just quacked. Peter then makes a series of noises, each more duck-like than the last in an attempt to defend himself, and only manages to prove Steph's point. After he realizes that he's really not helping his case, he sends them each a heatless glare. The staring lasts all of 3 seconds before all three of them double over in laughter. Okay, I admit, Peter manages between giggles. That was a little bit duckish. Just a little? Oh, shut up. Peter laughs, playfully swatting Tim's arm. Then, as if struck by a realization, his eyes widen and he looks up to Tim's face in concern, like he's checking if Tim's okay, or asking for permission to continue having fun. Who the fuck taught Peter to be so afraid when he expresses the want for others to stop talking? Someone on Tim's hit list, that's who. Tim, very carefully, hides his murder plots from seeping into his expression, setting it in marble like he's been taught, poised and precise, and utterly under his command. He's dealt with abuse victims before. He knows that allowing his anger to show through will just make the situation exponentially worse. No, he feigns confusion, chiseling scrunched brows and a slight frown onto the otherwise perfect bust, and asks, You good, Peter? The boy in question glances at Tim's arm briefly, almost imperceptibly, and reassures, Yeah, everything is fine. Steph notices the change in mood and straightens up, curbing her giggles and changing the subject. What do you guys have first period? Oh, I don't know actually, Peter says, seemingly letting the previous tension and concern go in favor of swinging his backpack to the front and rummaging through the front pocket. While he does that, Tim turns to Steph and says, Well, I have AP Chem. But at the same time, he widens his eyes, a silent question of, Did you see that reaction? Steph raises her eyebrows in a ghost of a nod and locks eyes with him. Oh, I think I have math when you have Chem. Fuck, I have Mr. Millam. Ugh. She whines, and Tim knows from various rants that the deep-rooted hatred she holds for Mr. Millam is very real. But as she says the word, she slightly increases her head towards Peter to ask, What are we going to do about it? Tim clenches his jaw in response. Fuck some people. Peter interrupts their silent conversation by waving a heavily folded piece of paper in the air. Found it! He shrugs the backpack back over his shoulder and unfolds what is presumably his timetable. K. Wednesday. Got it. He looks up towards them with something akin to dread. I have chemistry. Tim and Steph share a quick glance, and Steph decides to distract him from whatever is going on in his head, exclaiming, Ugh! You're both abandoning me in math. The betrayal! Tim walks behind Peter to get a good look at his timetable. Sweet, we're in the same class with Miss Cahill. She's a good teacher. It'll be fun. A small smile breaks through Peter's expression of pure anxiety and stress. Yeah. Tim plucks the sheet out of Peter's hand and looks over his classes. Okay, so you've got all chemistry, physics, engineering, and math with moi, he says, inclining his head smugly. PE with Steph and Duke, and history and Spanish with just Duke. A wide grin stretches across Peter's face, smothering his previous dread, and Steph decides to keep the good mood going, clutching her chest in mock pain before pointing an accusing finger at Tim. Timothy, I can't believe you've been hogging him. Tim refolds the timetable and slips it into the side pocket of Peter's bag, and throws a possessive arm around his shoulder. Deal with it, Brown. Steph sticks her tongue out at him. Guys? Peter asks timidly from his awkward little spot under Tim's arm. Don't we have to go to school? Shit! He and Steph curse in unison. Steph grabs Peter's forearm, and the three of them run the rest of the way to school, craning down streets to the sound of their uncontainable giggles. They skid to a stop in the doorway just as the bell rings. Miss Cahill raises an unimpressed eyebrow at the pair and gestures for them to sit down in the two empty spaces in the front row. Miss Cahill is a short woman, curly hair spilling unstyled across her shoulders, and warm brown eyes. She's obviously from Metropolis, but unlike most from the sister city, the teacher doesn't seem to look down on Gothamites, a fact that just reinforces her favorite teacher status in Tim's mind. Mr. Drake, I expected this from you, but dragging Mr. Parker into the trenches of your terrible attendance is a new low. Sorry, miss, won't happen again, he lies through his teeth. The teacher just rolls her eyes knowingly and hands them each a copy of the periodic table to stick into their notebook as they walk past their desk. Tim takes his with a grin and Peter with a shy apology. The teacher goes to update the register and the two boys ease into the chairs. Tim rummages through his bag and produces his pencil case and chemistry notebook, placing them neatly on the table beside each other. Peter pulls out his notebook for math and his single pencil. Gotham Library printed, half rubbed away, on the side. Tim bites back a grimace and pretends not to notice. Okay, class, so as I was saying, we're going to start the year with a recap of covalent bonding and halogens. So as we know, halogens are in a group of set. Tim zones out the lecture, preferring to turn his attention to Peter. He's anxious and stressed, that much is plainly obvious, though about what, Tim really couldn't guess. He doesn't think it's over the actual topic of the lesson, despite his initial reaction to discovering which subject he had first period. Seeing how he answers the questions posed to him easily and is absently doodling spider webs in the margins. But it is definitely something. His shoulders are tense, he's biting his lip, fidgeting with the hair near his ears, even though he keeps deliberately placing his hands on his thighs, and he keeps glancing at the teacher's cupboard when he thinks no one is looking. Tim stores away everything that he notes in an ever-growing folder about the enigma of a boy, in the back of his brain, and tries his hand at distraction. It's not really his forte, if he's being honest. Tim is sneaky, yes. He stalked Bruce for years without him noticing. But Tim isn't sneaky in plain sight like his siblings, like Dick or Steph. They know how to use their own personalities and bubbliness to their advantage, how to crank it up and use it as a distraction, how to use humor to cheer people up or set them at ease. Tim just can't do that, or rather, he can, but tries not to. Tim is well versed in the world of masks. He spent the majority of his childhood behind one after all. He knows how to be perfect and polite and poised. He knows how to build a sentence like a trap, how to ensnare the information he wants with words. But Tim tries so hard not to get his information that way because that isn't who he is. At heart, he's stubborn and awkward and blunt. He's the boy who knocked on Nightwing's door and demanded he take up Robin again. The boy who, when he refused, donned the colors himself. He's Tim Drake Wayne, not Janet, not Jake, Tim. and Tim won't manipulate his friends, ever. So Tim tries his best to start a conversation. I'm so glad they finally updated the periodic tables. He leaned and whispered to Peter, trying not to get him in trouble. It was getting ridiculous. Updated? He asked, shoulders relaxing slightly. Yeah, they finally added promethium and kryptonite to the table. About time, he says, pointing at the two elements floating alone at the bottom of the page, not stating how they still haven't added nth metal because the Shire and the Justice League refused to disclose its atomic weight or number to the UN. Believe him, Tim knows the UN sucks ass, but think of the scientists, the scholars. Huh, is all Peter says, but Tim can see the agitation melt out of his eyes as they start shining in curiosity. The green that had been sloshing around in his eyes is fading into a soft and somewhat unnatural amber. Tim is able to launch into a ramble about the interesting metals when someone clears their throat above them. The pair look up, like deer in headlights, at the unimpressed face of their teacher. She tuts. If you do want to talk, you can do it when I'm not talking to the class. Then she hands them both the spectroscopy textbooks, tapping on the cover as she talks, this time directly to Peter. You're a smart kid, Peter. I've seen your entrance exam. Feel free to work through this textbook instead of listening to me drone on at the front if you already know the material that's being covered, okay? Peter blushes and takes the textbook with a shy affirmation and she moves away. They both open their books to a nuclear spectroscopy page. So, Peter says, turning his whole body to face Tim, tell me about promethium. Okay, so the lesson is just coming to a close when Tim decides to address the elephant in the room. Peter, are you okay? Peter stops his writing to look at him in the eyes. Yeah? He sounds strained. He's nervously cracking his knuckles, his jaw is tense. He's an awful liar. No, you're not. You're clearly stressing about something. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, Tim. Peter, I'm not blind. You've been anxiously fiddling with your hair all lesson. Tim, and you've been glancing at the teacher's cupboard like it's a freaking bomb. Tim! No, Peter, what's going on? Tim! He exclaimed in a hushed tone, still worried about the teacher and other students. Hyper-awareness, a sign of nothing is wrong. Drop it. Okay, fine. Consider it dropped. He gives in, hands raised in surrender. Peter offers a grateful, if tense nod before propping his head on his arm to finish his notes. Unsurprisingly, Tim didn't drop it. He could be in danger, he whisper shouts to Steph in Arabic, unwilling to let his peers overhear the sensitive topic of the conversation. Steph remains stubbornly silent, trying to focus on her note-taking. He jumps at everything, Steph. Her jaw clenches, and Tim knows that he is one. Fine, she relents, but I don't have to like it. Never said you did. He smiles smugly, making grabby hands at her under the table, silently asking for his confiscated phone. I hate it when you make good points, she laments, placing it into his hands. But you're still a huge creep. What? Mr. Dragwain, Miss Brown, it doesn't sound like you're speaking German. Not that you would know. He hears Steph grumble under her breath and resists the urge to snort. It's true. Miss Fletcher has the worst German accent known to man. She doesn't even try. They both bow their heads and mime going back to work, but Tim is actually looking at his phone under the table, or more specifically, the security feed of Peter's English class. Steph is grumbling about stupid Waynes and their stupid hatred of privacy. Tim knows it's bullshit though, because the second their teacher shifts her gaze away from the pair, she leans in to watch the video, whispering, "This is so morally corrupt and creepy." Then stop watching, he counters. For lack of better argument, she sticks her tongue out at him. Wow, real mature. She punches him in the arm and, ow, that's definitely gonna leave a mark. Tim rubs his injured arm, and she leans further across him to see the grainy blob that is Peter Parker more clearly. I wish we had audio. Yeah, he agrees. If only he hadn't planted all those bugs in the chem lab, he sighs internally. But he's not telling Steph that he planted listening devices in a high school lab. He's bullied enough as is. Knuckles rap on the desk in front of him. Tim feigns a startled flinch and looks up, pocketing his phone as he does so. Miss Fletcher taps his empty page. Note-taking is an important part of the learning process. I expect diligent notes from a student such as yourself. Tim mumbles some sort of agreement, and the teacher walks off to peer ominously over some other poor kid's shoulder. Diligent. Oh, shut up. He's still trying to figure out Peter Parker at lunch, super covertly of course, but it's quite hard when he's being distracted by people around him. Cass is looking at him like a disappointed mother. Duke has his head in his hands laughing, and Peter's looking at him like he's possessed. "Dude," Peter says, leaning subconsciously away from him, "for the love of all that is holy, get some brown contact lenses." "What?" "You've got the worst blue-eye stare I've ever seen." Duke snorts into his sandwich. Tim looks to Steph for help, but she just shrugs in a way that says, "I know exactly what he's talking about, but I'm pretending I don't." So he turns back to Peter. "What the hell is a blue-eye stare?" Cass waves her hand to get his attention. Eyes very wide. Creepy. "You look like you're reading my secrets," Duke adds unhelpfully. "Steph has blue eyes too. Why aren't you saying this stuff about her?" Steph blinks. "I blink?" Duke narrows his eyes. "I don't know, man." "I blink!" Duke just shrugs and Tim opens his mouth, speechless. And to think, he once valued Duke as his favorite sibling. He can consider his status revoked. "Come to think of it, Tim," Steph says, leaning back and stroking her chin, "I don't think I've ever seen you blink." He ignores Peter's giggles and Duke's unapologetic grin and turns to Cass, exasperated. "Cass, help me out." She takes a minute to imitate Steph, scratching at her chin. "Sometimes," she signs, small mischievous smile on her lips. "I hate you guys." "Lying. You love us." He crosses his arms over his chest and shoves his chin downwards like a particularly pouty child. "Humph." Peter hides his burst of laughter behind his hand. Duke leans forward and slams his palms on the table, silently shaking in the way that means he's currently choking on laughter. Steph is obnoxiously listing metaphors for his eyes, and Cass is watching the scene unfold with amusement glimmering in her eyes. They continue to tease him about his orbs and his eye posture, sporadically throughout lunch. Tim finds it funny, but he would never say so out loud. It would ruin the joke, and Peter seems to be forgiving him for the overstepped boundaries. Tim hides his smile behind a fork full of pasta. By the time the bell rings, the whole group is laughing about something completely unrelated to Tim's haunting gaze. Duke and Peter are packing up and heading to the Spanish class, and Tim is about to head to English when Cass grabs his arm. "You watching? Why?" Peter is off. Her face scrunches in confusion. Peter is awake. "On?" "Yes, sorry. I mean, he's acting weird." Her gaze hardens in understanding. "Worried. Out of his control. Guilt." He nods. "Do you know why?" She shakes her hands in the air as if to clear it of his words. "Not matter. Stop. But..." She grabs his hands, interlocking their fingers and cutting his sentence short. Then she looks meaningfully into his eyes and slowly untangles a hand. "Stop." She gives him one last critical look over before releasing his hands and proclaiming, "You are a good brother. Too good. Just make it worse." Then she pats him on the head and leaves him to spend the rest of her day in the library. People need to stop telling Tim to drop things. It just seems to have the opposite effect, filling him with vindictive motivation and increasing his determination tenfold. You know what else seems to get Tim incredibly invested? A mystery he can't solve. And if Peter Benjamin Parker isn't that... Tim tried to spy on him in English, but he and Duke chose the one seat that's out of view of the cameras. And then when Tim tried to observe Peter as he left the school building, he somehow managed to vanish the moment Tim blinked, turning down a dead-end alley and disappearing into thin air. Nothing about the boy makes any sense. He appeared out of nowhere, but also has extensive documentation. He's jumpy and shy, but also reckless and brave. And then there's the Lazarus pit. Why was he in one? Does he have connection to the lake? How is it affecting him? How did he die? Who put him in one? How long was he dead? And why isn't he in any mortician's reports? Tim had been scouring every lead he could find on the boy and is still empty-handed, save for his growing confusion. The camera footage in Crime Alley that was annoyingly squirreled away by Babs to keep Bruce out and was near impossible to access, and when he did finally break into it, it was practically useless. Jason's damned feud with Bruce means that all the cameras in Crime Alley and most in the Bowery at large are either routinely disabled and or of such bad quality that the footage is completely unusable. Peter is little more than 7 fast-moving flesh-colored pixels that give him zero information. Then there are Peter's documents. They are impeccable and it sets Tim off. He went to school at Midtown High in New York until this year, when, after the death of his guardians, he moved to Crime Alley to stay with his family friend, one Matthew Michael Murdoch. Too alliterative to be a fake name or a friend. There are mortician records for all the deceased members of his family recorded of his grades in the school system, hospital bills for his uncle, and dates for a building in Crime Alley that is his new guardian's practice. But he's missing from the yearbook. None of his guardians have any photos anywhere online, and there are no criminal defense attorneys called Murdoch in Gotham. What Tim's found is far too perfect to be a hacker, as Bruce, Babs, and Vic aren't in the business of faking records for random teens, and it isn't Luther's or Brainiac's MO. But then again, all of those people would be able to manufacture photos. It's driving him insane. So maybe Peter's stress and frustration is a clue. Maybe it's a usable lead. So Tim is camped out on a rooftop across from the school building, in his full Robin regalia, with his binoculars, like he's on a proper bat-sanctioned stakeout and not a sleep-deprived act of desperation. His new and improved mask hides his bags anyway. No one has to know. As if on cue, he hears the recoil of a grapple gun and braces himself for a lecture. He doesn't even know which of his siblings it is yet. What's a vigilante like you doing on a roof like this? He sighs deeply, both in relief and preemptive exasperation. She's better than the rest of his family, but that's a comically low bar. Hi, S. Hi, S? That's all? I'm heart red, truly. Spoiler. What? Am I distracting you from your stockiness? My condolences. She cocks her pelvis and places a hand on her hip, raising an eyebrow at him over her face mask. Seriously, Red, you have issues. I'm well aware. He deadpans before turning back to peer through his binoculars. He pointedly doesn't look at Steph as she sighs and plops down on the roof beside him, and tries to suppress a smug smile as he hears her comms click off. So, what's the end goal here? Catch a janitor in the act of... She places a gloved hand over her mouth. Mopping floors? She whispers, sounding utterly scandalized. He places his binoculars on the ledge of the roof and rolls his eyes. Oh yes, what a thrilling pastime. You're a weirdo. How am I supposed to know what you do and don't find thrilling? He glares at her. Our undead friend was acting weird around the cupboard in chemistry. I have a hunch that he might return to the school building after hours. A hunch? Well, yeah. I'm sitting on a bland Coventry roof because of a hunch? What's wrong with Coventry roofs? They just don't have that Otisburg roof vibe. Even the roofs in Burnley are better than Coventry. I disagree, but at least we can all agree that the roofs in Old Gotham reign supreme. Oh yeah, it's the big skyscrapers and gargoyles. Very fun to grapple through. 10 out of 10. I agree. Wait, no, we're getting off topic. I'm not forcing you to be on any roofs. You can leave. Nah, I'm on babysitting duty. Tim narrows his eyes. Black bat? Black bat, she agrees easily. He pouts and she pats his shoulder with an extremely patronizing there. He turns his back and places binoculars over his eyes, skulking. Just in time to see a Peter Parker-sized shadow dart across the school grounds and behind a building. Steph must have noticed a change in his posture because she leans her full body weight onto him and makes a grab at the binoculars. Ooh, what is it? Let me see. No, let me see. Get your own binoculars. No. They wrestle over the gravel roof for a couple of seconds before Steph wins by pulling down her mask, licking her hands, and shoving them in his face, causing him to recoil and surrender his binoculars. She sticks her tongue out and then triumphantly pulls her mask back up before settling over at the ledge overlooking the school. She then reaches into her utility belt and tosses him her own pair of binoculars. I hate you so much. She just smiles and he settles next to her. There are a few minutes of no activity before one of Tim's bugs picks up rustling. He smiles and hands Steph an earbud, which she takes without question, and they listen in. Okay, please still be there. Please still be there. Yes! Okay, now, I just need to make the carbon tetrachloride, and I can mix it all up and be on the streets tonight. Tim and Steph share a look. Carbon tetrachloride is one of the many substances that Batman has drilled onto them as a suitable alternative to anesthetic in an emergency scenario. In other words, drugs. Peter is making drugs, and really shitty drugs at that. Carbon tet is a carcinogenic, cancer-causing, and is extremely toxic to the liver and kidneys in high concentrations. A drug agent that could be added to pre-existing drugs, act like a relaxant, and be near fatal. Peter was helping in drug production, probably for a rogue. Shit. Yeah, I know. Just be thankful that I didn't actually manage to make it and have to leave it. It would have decayed into a phosphagen gas, which is way worse than chlorine. What? MJ had a World War I phase. Peter keeps rambling about chemicals to someone who he's presumably on the phone to. But Tim kind of zones out to his swirling thoughts. He's snapped out of it by a very loud, "Dang it!" and then the sound is static as his bugs are destroyed. He and Steph make eye contact. They need to help Peter. This just got personal. Steph gives him a terse nod and takes a running jump off the roof, grappling north towards Uptown. Tim settles back on the roof, resolute in his decision to protect his friend. This just got fucking personal. Alright guys, that is the end of chapter 21 of Green Through and Through by Another Fucking Robin. I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next chapter.